I want to start, you, in your role, first as a member of the House and as a senator, you've been neck deep in this issue of access to capital. And
Right.
so entrepreneurial activity is at around a 40-year low. 81% of entrepreneurs aren't accessing any kind of capital to grow. What do we do about that?
Well, that's a great question, a big question, and I'll just frame it on where I'm from. Most of you know that whoever is a senator or a member of the House is very focused on where you're from. West Virginia is 1.8 million people. Traditionally, I think the Kauffman Foundation has rated us as one of the lowest in terms of the bottom of the states in terms of startups. We are generally an older population, which has been a problem for us because our brain drain, our younger people get educated in our state. A lot of people from the metropolitan area here in DC will go to West Virginia University and then turn right back around and come into the DC area to find their futures. And so that's been an issue. We've been traditionally a coal, heavy energy manufacturing state. Well, we all know what's happened to coal most recently, but also the future of heavy manufacturing and coal and the coal industry in general has stabilized in our state right now. But we made a mistake by putting all of our eggs in one basket, and now we're paying the piper for that. So to try to figure out how to transition and diversify has been the big question for us, and a lot of that I feel is at the hands of our young entrepreneurs and innovators and folks that are thinking. When I've seen some studies, and you may be able to help me with this, Ross, it says that folks coming out of school right now, younger people, they're looking for different things in jobs than maybe I did when I was first coming out. And, you know, a steady paycheck and a nice retirement were what people born in the 40s and 50s were looking for. Now, a lot of it's quality of life issues and being able to have a more well-rounded opportunity. And that's perfect for a state like West Virginia because it's beautiful, it's still wild and wonderful, it's not crowded, it's safe, and it's close to the urban centers but not in the urban centers. So we feel like we've got great potential here. Where I think, at least in my state, where we see a lot of activity is around the universities. And I think that this is going to be the key to us in West Virginia. We have a launch lab at WVU. We have an innovation center at Marshall University. And really trying through our business schools to bring new ideas, to foster those ideas, and then to have them grow from the university into the private sector. And that's probably a trend, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's great. And I'll follow up on the universities in a second. I want to, it's very easy in a Washington, D.C. conference to get 100,000 feet. I want you to ground us for a second. I think when people in the public think entrepreneur, they think New York, San Francisco, mm-hmm. tech company. What's an entrepreneur in West Virginia that inspires you? You know,
an entrepreneur in West Virginia would probably be somebody who starts very small, maybe in their house or in their dorm room or with their friend from high school and begins an idea. There's a company in Morgantown, I want to make sure I get the name right, Aspeny, which is working to develop software to help companies, for instance, like an Alexa, run on batteries rather than to be plugged into an electric circuit, and has found some success. Very small company, but has been able to grow their idea. You know, it's really it's the old version of mom and pop, mm-hmm. And I think that's mostly what I think of an entrepreneur. It's not somebody who's tied to large funding sources or to a large community. We have a lot in our tourism industry, I would say we have, in the New River Gorge, we have a lot of entrepreneurs who have started a while ago, but have then diversified their appeal from not just whitewater rafting to hiking, zip lines, and all kinds of other things to capitalize on the tourism aspect of that.
So a lot of entrepreneurs, when they think about government, they just want government to get out of the way. But you've been particularly active on one thing that government can do to set up the infrastructure for entrepreneurs, and that's broadband. Can you tell me some about what you've been doing with Capito Connect and broadband initiatives, and what's not working in the government, what you think we need to see.
Well, it's funny, it's funny you say that people want government to get out of the way. They want government to get out of the way, but they want their government grant first before the government gets out of the way. Or low interest loan, yeah. And
set
so,
me up and then
yeah, set me up. Well, help me out and then go away. And I do think the government through SBICs and SBIRs, we're doing a lot in our research area with our SBIRs that I think are transitioning into the private sector, into profit making, and that's great. And the universities have hooked on to that as well in terms of a separate entity to the university as a nonprofit. In terms of broadband, I mean, we are the lowest deployed broadband state in the country. We have obviously geographic challenges, but I don't accept that. If we can talk to somebody on the moon, we can certainly talk to somebody through a mountain or through a couple of mountains. And there's lots, so I'm totally agnostic as to what the technology is. And we've really been pushing this with the FCC. Commissioner Pai has been very, he's from Kansas, and he's been, which is totally flat, but still has the deployment issue in Kansas in the rural areas. And he is through his, through the FCC and the Connect America Fund and things like this, trying to incent private investment. We also in the last, again, I'm talking about dollars here because everybody says it takes time and money to do these things, to get that last house deployed into, but there's a lot of innovation. For instance, Microsoft's working in some of the white space areas. There's a dispute between the broadcasters, but we're working on working that out. There are some wireless technologies that are being deployed in places like West Virginia that are, I think, hold great promise because of our geographic challenges. And so we've just, the USDA Agriculture has got $600 million in this last bill that would deploy again to model it after RUS. Remember, that's where we deployed electric service in the 20s and 30s. This is to deploy the new essential or considerable new essential broadband. And we do have to talk a lot on the Hill about 5G and the deployment of 5G, but in the rural areas, Ross, what I worry about is we haven't even gotten to 3G in some areas, and there's going to be a lot of people that get to 5G, and again, it's going to be a digital divide. But if we're ever going to attract entrepreneurs and innovators into our more remote areas, we have to have this.
That's great. So, quick follow-up question. We've been working with Microsoft and members of your team actually supporting entrepreneurs that are trying to build broadband connectivity in West Virginia and northern Maine and rural places across the country. One of the challenges, and this is one of the topics of this conference, is sometimes big incumbents don't like it when entrepreneurs are getting in there. And one thing that you've been very active in, from what I understand, is One Touch Make Ready, which is, I'm learning a lot about broadband, but if you are a co-op that wants to expand broadband in West Virginia, correct me if I'm wrong here, there are a number of different regulations that make it very difficult for you to tap into the mainstream, and you've led a fight to make it much easier. So tell me a little bit more about those challenges.
Well, if you read about what's going on in the area, one of the real problems are not to get too technical, but the mapping. If you've ever been in rural America, and if you look at a map and it says this has availability of either wireless or internet, and you know you're not in you know when you're not in service. I mean, it's pretty obvious, and so the mapping is very inaccurate, and I attribute a lot of that to the larger providers because for instance, in a state like mine, for a while we've only had one provider. So that provider, if you have a census tract that shows that one person in that census tract is served, then that entire census tract is considered served, and that would prevent that co-op from being able to come into that area under some Connect America funds and all that. So they're reworking that. The mapping is now going to be done out of Commerce, out of NTIA, out of Commerce to try to get more accurate mapping. And that's going to have a big impact on rural America.
So to switch gears a little bit, obviously a national crisis and a crisis that hits close to home in West Virginia is the opioid crisis. And there are a number of reasons why it's a crisis, and getting into that's probably not helpful. But talking about solutions, we at Village Capital, the Kauffman Foundation, the organizer of this group, believe that entrepreneurs in a community are often best placed to solve the problems in the community. And you've been pretty vocal about a lot of the resources to solve the opioid crisis are going through grants to large coastal universities and not to people in the community who understand to solve it. So how do you, what solutions do you see homegrown in West Virginia, and what needs to change in terms of who has the chance to solve it?
Yeah, well, this is a really sad problem, as you know, and very, very difficult for a small state, or any state, really. West Virginia has the highest mortality rate resulting from overdoses. The country at large lost over 72,000 people to this crisis. That is an enormous, think of one of those big stadiums, that's how you think of 72,000 people in there, and all of them died in 1 year from an overdose. So Huntington, West Virginia is a really good example of this. And Huntington became well known when 28 people overdosed in one day. In a 4-hour period, 26 of them were able to be pulled out of their overdose. 2 of them died. Huntington has just awakened to this problem. And it's a big problem. And so what they've done is to try to become sort of a centers of excellence. While you don't want to be known as the place where this all occurs, facing your problems is part of the problem. So facing the problem and then, taking advantage of it and doing best practices. So they created Lily's Place, which is a place for drug-addicted babies to go outside of a hospital setting to detox and get back into a family. They also have, through Marshall University, an addiction center. Marshall University has created a centers of excellence for addiction, and so it's been a whole community. They created community response teams where if you overdose, you don't just walk out of the hospital and never see anybody again. You're followed up by a crisis response team. So you have this going on in a community that's relatively small. At the same time, in the same community, you have a company called Core 10. And I wanted to talk about them coming into insourcing into rural America. It's a Nashville company. It does software development. It happens that one of the principals, and it may be the owner, I'm not exactly sure, I don't want to misstate, is from West Virginia and wants to help and capitalize on his hometown. So he brings back about 25 jobs into this community, into Huntington, and has found great success. Because the school's hungry for this. What I started out at the beginning saying, people want to live in their home state. They want to live in a quiet, easy, safe place that's less expensive. And for the company, it's actually less expensive because it's harder to attract talent in Nashville. It's harder to, and you have to pay them more, quite frankly. And you can pay people a little bit less, and you can also work with the university at the same time on a cooperative agreement. So they're getting ready to grow their business in Huntington, West Virginia. They're actually in an opportunity zone, so this is good. And so we have some success there. We have another company that I'll leave unnamed is coming into Charleston, West Virginia. Same sort of thing. It's mostly here in DC, but they say once they find their talent, get their talent, they get picked off because it's such a competitive market. So this is great for rural America, to be able to insource into rural America some of the great things that are happening in larger cities that can occur in the smaller cities if you take the time to develop the talent and put the resources there.
It's great. So we've got time for one more question. And you mentioned Lily's Place, which is an amazing model to take care of babies who've been hit by the crisis, and learning more about this is an entrepreneur in Huntington who started this and faced fundraising barriers and permitting. It was almost death by 1,000 cuts, and we see this all over the country. But looking forward, you in the most recent tax bill were co-sponsor of the Opportunity Zone legislation, and that has the opportunity to perhaps remove that barrier of capital for a lot more entrepreneurs. So there are investors, foundations, fund managers in this room who are all trying to figure out Opportunity Zones. What do you hope happens with Opportunity Zones?
I hope you all come to West Virginia and invest. That's the end of the story. No, here's what I hope happens. West Virginia has 54, I'll use us as an example, 54 Opportunity Zones. We had to really, through my office, and Ross helped us with this, but I have a young man who works for me in West Virginia named Aaron Spork, who's phenomenal. And we had to really push our governor to really get involved with this because it came up so quickly and then the deadline was quick. So I don't know what happened in other states, but we were able to get our designated 54 zones in. We obviously have a lot of distressed communities. It's mostly our small towns. Parkersburg, Wheeling, Clarksburg, Morgantown, all these are under 50,000 people, but they have great potential to draw back in to mixed use, to the kind of living that, that studies show millennials want and want to have. So as we're moving forward with this, we're trying to educate not only our developers, but our potential funders within the state as to the opportunity. Tim Scott, who with Senator Booker, and I understand Senator Booker's coming later, so he'll be able to get more in depth with this, came to Huntington, West Virginia, and we talked with the local leaders there. And it was really interesting to see how, particularly in Huntington, and I'm sure I did the deep dive there, I haven't done the deep dive everywhere, it's not just a solo kind of, okay, here's a zone and that's what you're going to do. It's in with the university, it's adjacent to the university, it's adjacent to where there's already been some redevelopment in the city. Core 10, for instance, is already in the zone. So you can't just stand alone, pick a spot and say, here I am, help me. You've got to have obviously the potential for return on investment. And we're a bit concerned about that, and I told that to you earlier, in that the return on investment in rural America is always slower. It's always a little less maybe, and maybe a little more frustrating. And so I guess my plea is don't give up on rural America. You know, we have all kinds of great things going for us, but funding and opportunities are slimmer there. Therefore, it takes maybe a little bit more patience. So I'm anxious to see how the whole thing rolls out. I think it's going to be really I'm really, really excited about opportunity zones because I see the opportunity in a state like mine.
Great. Senator, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you all.